Good morning, at least here in Los Angeles. Good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our workshop. We're going to be looking at forgiveness. And some of you have been here before because this is, I think, our third event with Dr. Luskin. So you know that it's a process. Forgiveness is not an event. It's not a light switch. Oh, I'm going to forgive and I get it done. No, that's probably not how it works. It might even work as, hell no, I'm not going to forgive. And then if you're engaged in any type of consciousness practice, an authentic consciousness practice, doesn't matter what it is, you'll eventually identify your unwillingness and then eventually experience, not just identify, but experience your willingness and eventually experience the results of opening yourself up to the process. And I say it that way because it's like everything else I've ever experienced in human development. Notice I didn't use the word spiritual. In human development, there seems to be some type of connection between willingness and a response from the universe. I'm being vague, yes, intentionally. For those of you who have any resistance to the words spiritual and God or higher power or spirituality, I don't have any aversion to the words, but others do, and I try to accommodate so that people can possibly have an open mind and an open heart, which is really the point. You've all, well, most of you have seen me do this. From 1988, I was 4 years sober, and I sat down with a man who I wanted to help me to go through the steps. After 45 minutes of my telling him who I was and where I'd been, he said, "You've got a lot of information, Herb, but you have very little transformation. You have a lot of academic knowledge, but you have very little change. The knowledge that you have has not been filtered through your heart to your feet, and you don't have an experience, and you have not changed." He quoted Einstein. You know that if you've been around me at all, any length of time, that I love succinct wisdom sayings. They just seem to penetrate my unconsciousness. They seem to penetrate the very thick curtain that holds me in darkness. I don't know that I'm in darkness. I don't know that I don't know. And this man said, quoting Einstein, "The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem." Brilliant. Of course, that's what Bill Wilson knew. My mind cannot fix my mind because my mind is the problem. And any fix that my problem mind comes up with will have problems inherent in it. So I need a new consciousness. That's what he called a spiritual awakening. Step 12. If you haven't looked at it that way, I hope I'm introducing something that will part the curtains a little bit. I'm a 12-step person. My experience with the forgiveness process comes out of the 12-step process. But this workshop is not necessarily going to be geared to the 12 steps. I'm co-facilitating with Fred Luskin, Dr. Fred Luskin, PhD clinical psychologist from Stanford. He's a professor at Stanford. He wrote his doctoral dissertation 30 years ago on forgiveness. Then he converted that doctoral dissertation into a book for people who don't have that kind of scientific background so that we could read it and understand and learn from it, called Forgive for Good. And I'll without any qualification say it's the second best book I've ever read. You may or may not know me, but that's high praise. I studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years in a monastery. I have a graduate education in philosophy and theology. Then when I left the monastery in 1964, I studied psychology because I was going to be a psychologist. I have a graduate education in psychology. I know some stuff. But as I said, I had a lot of information, but no transformation 4 years sober. And when I did the steps out of the big book, I had an awakening. That is an experience of change. Radical, radical, radical change. Forever. It changed me forever. A change in the way I think and feel and behave. So I say the big book is the best book I've ever read because it's got a formula in it that's so effective. I've been doing my weekly workshops now for 30 years. Hundreds, thousands of people have gone through the step process, and a large percentage have finished the 9th step, and everyone who did has had a spiritual awakening, a change in the way they think and feel and behave. That's why I say it's the first best book I've ever read. So saying that Fred Luskin's book, Forgive for Good, is the second best book because it's effective. It has a formula. Fred refers to himself as secular. I refer to myself as spiritual. That's the contrast. He is a scientist, I am not. He believes in human development from a psychological and a scientific standpoint. And I do, of course, but my own experience, I'm not scientifically oriented at all. My personal experience is that it was a spiritual process that changed me. The uncanny thing that I observed when I read Fred's book when it first came out is that the process of forgiveness has a dynamic. His secular experience was revealed in a vocabulary that describes the dynamic process from a psychological and scientific standpoint. My vocabulary comes from the 12 steps and the spiritual, but the dynamic underneath both of ours, spiritual and secular, the dynamic, the rhythm of it, the stages of it are identical. When we met 30 years ago, we were on a panel. That's where I first encountered him and his book and his knowledge and his experience. And I said just to him what I just said to you. And he said, yes, the dynamic is the same, Herb, but the 12-step people have a unique advantage. I said, what's that, Fred? He said, you got God. He says, I don't bring God in because I'm a scientist. I'm a psychologist. There's no need for it from the scientific and human development perspective. But it adds an X plus factor to the power of the forgiveness process. I mean, what humility that represents. It's not his viewpoint. It's not his philosophy, but he honors our viewpoint and our philosophy from the 12-step and or the spiritual or religious. I'm very open to any of those words. So This is an invitation for you to open your heart and mind. And you may be willing. I mean, clearly, I think I'm preaching to the choir. You've showed up giving up a Saturday to come to this, paying some registration fee to come to this. So it's assumed that you're willing and interested in the process of forgiveness. But the prayer that I'm introducing you to, if you haven't seen it before, and reintroducing to you if you have seen it before, just to remind you, is for spiritual intervention. I'm not asking God to help me set aside or open my mind. I'm asking a power other than myself, whatever that means to you, to each one of you, a power other than yourself, whether that be God as we don't understand it, or higher power, or good orderly direction, or the force or the source, or the organismic life force, as Dr. Berger would call it. Dr. Berger's my co-facilitator in emotional sobriety. Most of you know our work. Whatever that power is that we want to believe in and make an attempt to believe in, we're asking to bring the spiritual crowbar and open our mind and open our hearts. I am willing, but I can't do that. I'm even powerless to have an open mind and open heart. And I want it. It's my intention. And yet I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I don't see, and I don't know and I can't see even that. I mean, I know it for a fact, looking back over my shoulder, that I'm incrementally opened up. There are probably 300 curtains in front of me. And over the last 33 years, curtains have been opening up progressively, and there's more light, there's more information, and there's more experience. And I know there's more curtains. So I'm inviting you now to pray out loud if you're all on mute, or silently to yourself, or just holding the thought that you are willing to have and be gifted an open mind and an open heart. For this next 3 hours, we'll be together. Fred will join us sometime in the first hour. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, my path to freedom in you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, my path to freedom, and especially you. So I use the term in the prayer, path to freedom. The topic I've already confirmed is forgiveness, a process. Forgiveness is a process of freedom. Notice there's pathetic Herbie, completely clueless, in the bondage, the twofold bondage. Again, I'm coming from the perspective of a 12-step orientation, but it could be just without 12-step, it could be any human development, adaptation. The first step says I have a problem with addiction, first half, and I have a problem with unmanageability. If you were paying attention, the set-aside prayer was about both addiction and unmanageability. So those are two very different kinds of bondage. Freedom from the addiction is guaranteed by the first 9 steps. I just used a word you might not have heard before if you haven't heard me. Freedom from addiction is guaranteed in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 84. You won't find those words, but here's what you will find. We are placed in a position of neutrality. Hear the grace of that. But also, it's at the end of the 9th step So it's assumed that you've done an awful lot of work. And it's our work in combination with the grace of, you fill in the blank. That is the combination that frees us from the addiction. But very soon in that page and the next page, 84 and 85, it said, however, we're not cured. My interpretation is not cured of our unmanageability. It says we have a daily reprieve. The first 9 steps are the program of recovery. The next 3 steps, 10, 11, and 12, are the program of living. Steps 4 through 9 are the steps of forgiveness. Step 10 is the tool of emotional sobriety that ensures the continuation of the freedom from the bondage of self. Freedom. Look up the word forgiveness if you haven't. That was my first job given to me by my step guide. Look up the term forgiveness. He had me do that after I finished my 4th step. I didn't know why. It's not an instruction in the big book or the 12 and 12, but it was his experience. The 4th step is that first step in the forgiveness process. Because if you've done a 4th step, as I have, literally out of the big book, with some interpretation and extension of the instructions from the big book, you identify at the end of the 4th and 5th step that you're not a victim ever. Hello, you're not a victim ever. Oh, we may have been victimized. That's true in many of our cases. But in terms of our resentment and our fear and our dishonesty and our shame and our guilt and our sexual behavior and our secrets, the entire content of the 4th step, we're not a victim. We're the perpetrator. That's the turnaround. The bondage of self really just means I need to be released. Hear my vocabulary, be released. All right, so I said look up the word forgiveness in a dictionary, and it's to release. If I were to add to that, it would be to be released. I was released. I was released, hear that. But it wasn't just a passive act and a gift. That certainly was the grace that was involved, that gift, that free gift. But my willingness to take a lot of action was the key to it. So I'm going to invite you to some action. I hope you have paper and a pen or some type of a writing instrument, or maybe you just do your technology electronically. That's however you can do this without distracting yourself from being present to what we're talking about. Why are you here? What is your current suffering? Sure, you're here to learn about forgiveness. Why? Put the name down of one person or one event or one circumstance where you are aware of being unforgiven, that you are unforgiving, or that you are unforgiven. Notice, going out from you or coming into you. What is your current suffering? Life is suffering, says the Buddhist. Right? Life is suffering. First noble truth. The second noble truth is suffering comes from attachment. Third noble truth is the antidote for attachment is detachment. The fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. the path of eliminating suffering, the Eightfold Path. Right living, right thinking, right attitude, right work. There's 8 different words that they add on to right, meaning correct or healthy. The author of The Road Less Traveled, very first line became famous. Life is difficult. Yep. The road less traveled, especially. But I'm going to offer you a second question. Well, maybe it's a third question. Why here is a good question. What is your current suffering is the focus question. But now this is a deeper question. What's the source of your suffering? Your current suffering is smoke. You can identify the smoke because of the suffering, but it's not the source. What's the fire? I couldn't have made those distinctions before I did a thorough 4th step out of the big book. I knew what my resentments were, but I didn't know the underlying causes and conditions. I knew what my fear was, but I hadn't gone through an analytical process that revealed the source of my fear. Self-reliance. I had really never done an inventory of my sexual behavior. This was the first time I got a glimpse at the full picture of my history, which was embarrassing to me for the very first time, seeing the behavior and the history. But the inventory in the big book suggests us 9 different questions, the 9th question of which is, what should you have done instead? And from that question, I surfaced principles underneath. What principles did I have that I was transgressing? What principles didn't I have that would have made me a better human being? Principles. Those of you who are in a 12-step program knows that the 12th step says, in addition to the spiritual awakening, says, practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, what principles? Bill never did take the time to give us a list. He's referring, in a way, to principles as a synonym for the steps. So inherent in each of the steps is an operating human principle. Principles are of reality. This is the heart of the forgiveness process, is to identify principles of reality, to know that they're immutable. The law of gravity is a principle of physics. It doesn't change, well, in the Earth's atmosphere. The law of gravity is a principle in the Earth atmosphere. It's immutable and non-negotiable. Byron Katie, in her book, Loving What Is, talks about reality. Reality just is. It's not good or bad. Reality, she says, just is, but only 100% of the time. My goodness, that's a great platform for us to begin our conversation of forgiveness. One of the participants in my physical workshop, when I was doing those, just jumped up one day in the midst of the 4th step and said, Herb. And I said, Jason, what's going on? He said, I got it. What did you get? Goodness, he was all excited. He said, reality is not personal. Don't scoff. Take that into your meditation sometime. Reality is not personal. It'll change your life. Reality just is what it is. And we have a story about it. Now, the whole basis of the 12-step process, of course, and probably any authentic spiritual process, and maybe even authentic human development process, is about power. The 12th step says in the first step, I need help. And in the second step, help's available. It's that simple. Page 53, Bill says, God is or God isn't. What is your choice? It also gives you lots of room in terms of the God word and says, you choose. You choose. Please hear this. You choose. Not your sponsor, not the book, not the religion, not the parents, not the school. You choose what your belief is about power, the help that you need. I mentioned Dr. Berger's term, organismic life force. What brings an acorn to be an oak tree? Fabulous image and a great meditation. Organismic life force. But step 2 is a choice. Step 3 is a decision. The difference, you know what? This nuance has come to me only in the last 2 to 3 months. And I've been thinking about it for a long time and sharing it with people for a long time. Step 2 is a choice, but step 3 is a decision. What's the difference? Well, the decision is for action, to have a relationship with this, fill in the blank, power. And that relationship is one of alignment. Neither of those words is in the big book. If you want more unpacking of steps 2 and 3, you could go to my website. I have YouTube's, Melissa and Rainey mentioned the playlists. There's 8 different series on different topics, some of them the steps, some of them very focused, laser focused on each of the steps in a very deep and broad way. And that will unpack what I mean by relationship, and where you'll find it referred to in the big book, pages 62 and 63. Not with the word, but with the model. You won't find the word alignment in the big book, but it's my conclusion as to the best word that represents step 3, to turn. To turn from what to what? From my self-centeredness, which was the key to unmanageability, page 62. And the key to step 3, that turning from self to other. That turning that puts me in alignment with reality. I turn my will and my life over to the God of my understanding. I could say, and prefer to say, the God of my not understanding. Step 3 does not say we turn our will and our life over to God. Please be specific when you read step 3 and pay attention to the word care. What does that mean? Turn my will and my life over to the care. Hugely different. It leaves me with a ton of personal responsibility. God is not the manager of my life, whatever God means to you. Nature, perhaps, reality with a capital R, power, source, or force. All of those really work really well. Sunlight of the Spirit is my most current favorite phrase in the big book. It changes from cycle to cycle, from year to year. But right now, sunlight of the Spirit, that antidote to the darkness, that shines light on my story. See, forgiveness is all about my interpretation of reality, my interpretation of my history, my interpretation of who I am, who they are, and how the world works, my interpretation. And I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I don't see. And I don't know any of that, even though I'm hearing Herb say it, and I hear the words, and the words are simple. I understand the words. But many of you right now, well, that's just not my experience, because I know some stuff and I've had some experience. All right. That's why that first two questions were so important. Well, three questions. Why am I here? What is my current suffering? Those are pretty straightforward. But then the third question, what's the source of my suffering? If you've done some analytical work in the fourth step, you'll be able to answer that question. And if you haven't, you won't. And the high likelihood, if you haven't done the work I'm referring to, you won't even know that you don't know. I'm not playing with you. I'm inviting you to that open mind and that open heart that we talked about right at the beginning. We do need a new pair of glasses. We start out life literally in the womb. One of my teachers calls it the core of goodness in us that then gets determined by our genetics. You might have noticed I'm bald. You might have noticed I'm male. You might have noticed I'm white. None of those are my fault. My father was male, white, and bald. He also happened to be an alcoholic. And his father and his father and his father have all of those characteristics, including alcoholism. My conclusion is it's genetic, and there's some science to support that. Our genetics determine our destiny in many, many, many cases. Notice that these are a replica of those Russian dolls you see in gift shops. Sometimes they're called nesting dolls. I had a Russian lady in my workshop from Russia, and she said, Matrushka, meaning mother. Our family culture determines a whole bunch of who we are. Not just the culture of our family, but the culture in which our family is living. You could have people from Italy, but they're living in the United States, but they brought the culture of Italy into the United States. And so that will even have a different nuance. Your emotional experiences in school, at the various levels of school, and exposure to friends and other kinds of experiences, as well as the education that you get from work environment, from social environment, from church environment. Notice, though, the facade of the doll is all the same. It all looks like Herb or Sally or Nancy or Bob. And yet these are the various things that have been layered on us, creating the lenses through which we look. My story, look at the top, my story. And the fourth step through the ninth step, that process of forgiveness. The fourth step through the ninth step. It begins with the process of forgiveness, I believe, starts with the fourth step. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And it concludes with the ninth step. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I didn't know any of this when I was doing the work for the first time. In fact, I didn't know any of it until after I finished the work and was continuing to grow spiritually and emotionally. That fifth step was the unpacking of my story. Not an autobiography, although there was some of that. Bill says in the fifth step, we tell someone all our life story. But it was really about the dynamic of my life, the thoughts that I had, the attitudes that I had, the experiences that I had, the emotions that I had or didn't have, the thoughts I expressed, what I really, really believed about myself and other people and life itself. And it was after the fifth step that I was very clear that everything shifted. I went from being a victim of my father and my family, being a victim of my bosses and my environment and my education, to finally, at age 50 years old, taking full responsibility for my life. Oh, all of what I just mentioned was formative and deformative. It is true. But at age 50, they're not the problem anymore. Circumstances, events, and people are not the problem. My problem is my reaction to circumstances and events. My problem is my reaction. My problem is 100% my problem. I don't have a part in my resentment. You hear it all the time. Challenge those words. I don't have a part in my resentment. I have 100%. It's my anger held into resentment. It's my reaction to people, circumstances, and events. Although the people, circumstances, and events were very harsh, very tragic, very dysfunctional, sometimes criminal in some of our cases. It's history. In many cases, ancient history. And I'm living today as if the events are happening today, and they're not. It's my imagination, and it's my feelings, and it's my memory, and it's my reaction. That's the transformative. That's where the spiritual awakening begins. That's where I begin to take a look at, I've put myself in jail because of the operation of my instincts, fight, flight, and freeze. This is the model I use. Bill Wilson uses it in step 4 in the 12 and 12. Instincts gone awry. These are scientific, biological instincts for survival. But they create a reaction of anger, fight, flight, fear, freeze, dishonesty. And what I mean by that is camouflage. If I can't fight you and I can't run from you, hunker down. If I have a green environment, turn green. If I have a blue environment, turn blue. If I have a yellow environment, turn yellow. Hiding. That came out of my sex inventory, was all about dishonesty. So dishonesty was the major, the macro net over which I could see my freeze reaction, one of which manifested in my sexual behavior. But there was so much other dishonesty in it. My primary response. Some people have a primary response of anger. Others will have a primary response of fear. Others will have a primary response of dishonesty. Each of us has all three, but each of us has a dominant. That dishonesty is about shame from my standpoint. Resentment is anger that's held and refelt, sentire, to feel again and again and again. Fear, that anxiety that plagues our culture today. Dishonesty as expressed in sex and or in a bunch of shame. And I'm talking about unhealthy shame here. In contrast to guilt, guilt is a negative feeling about my behavior. Shame is a negative feeling about my very being. That sense of low self-esteem or even loathing. I hear that from people. It's not my problem, but I have shame as a primary response to reality. I want to hide, so I lie. But they all come, as Bill said on page 62, from our self-centeredness, not as a bad term, just as an observation of survival. Steps 4 through 9, name and remove those obstacles. Step 4 begins, step 9 concludes. Step 4 is not an autobiography. It's an analysis of the underlying causes and condition and the exact nature. Read page 64. Bill was very clear, at least with the use of the words, if not the application. And step 9 is about removing the clouds in us to the sunlight of the Spirit in us. That's why I love that image. It's so graphic in terms of steps 4 through 9. The sunlight of the Spirit is deep down inside of me. No matter how you interpret that, steps 2 and 3, sunlight of the Spirit, my human nature, my higher self, my true self, psychologists and Buddhists and scientists, it doesn't matter what word you use. We're talking about that life force in us, available to us, is blocked by us because of our dysfunctional reaction to life around us. And we need to identify and remove those obstacles to turn to be in alignment with life. Such a wonderful, simple phrase. Life as it manifests, principles as they manifest. I do not have any control. The magic of the Serenity Prayer is I do not have any control. I have no control. I have influence. Lose the word control. Lose it. I don't control anything outside of me. I don't control anything inside of me. I have influence. But even that's modest, isn't it? So column 3 is the beginning of my experience with forgiveness. And Fred will be talking about beliefs and shoulds. Who am I? My self-esteem, not psychological self-esteem. Bill means, I'll use a fancy word, that existential self-esteem. Who do I really believe that I am? Not feel, not low self-esteem, high self-esteem, but this belief I have that I'm worthy, this deep belief that people should respect me. Anytime you use the word should, it will signal to you what you believe. It's a great technique to determine and elevate and make visible what you believe about yourself. Should, or about life, or about others. Life should, I should, you should. It tells you what your model, what your litmus test is of yourself, your litmus test of other people, and even of life itself. Life should be fair. Really? Where did you get that? Life should be fair. I should be treated with respect. Other people should be trustworthy. Where do we get the story? And when we examine it, we see, as Katie Byron said, with those questions that she asked, loving what is, loving what is. Reality should. By whose standards? Who told you the story? It's make-believe. There are principles. We get to sort those out. What are they? When a deer comes down to the lake to get a drink of water, it's wonderful for the deer. When the mountain lion comes up behind the deer and eats the deer, it's very bad for the deer, but it's very good for the mountain lion. I'm not a relativist in sense of moral code, but I'm giving an example of get a perspective on reality. And when you have a deep resentment, Bill says you need to remove it by identifying your deep resentment. Not all my resentments. I had probably the first time I went through step 4 resentment inventory, I probably had 80 resentments. Some of them are white shark and some of them were minnows. This man asked me to identify the white shark, the 2,500 ton killers like my father, my bosses, to identify them. And then the big book suggests that we pray because we're powerless. But please look at pages 66 and 67. It does not say we pray for them. It says we pray for ourselves. We pray for healing. We pray for the divine surgeon to enter into our soul and surgically remove the cancer in us that is that resentment. I cannot remove it. I can identify it. I can write about it. I can analyze it. I can understand it, and I can talk about it. I can make amends around it if there's harm done. I just can't remove it necessarily. So Bill says we pray for healing. We pray for, that's my word, we pray for the removal of the deep resentment because we want to be free of it. If you have a resentment and you don't want it, follow the prayer practice that's in pages 66 and 67. If you want help, go to my Way of Life document. It's on my website, right in between column 3 and column 4 of the resentment inventory. It's a sample prayer with the words that come from the words in the big book, with some added features from my own experience. I don't have any deep resentments. They were removed in 1989 and they've never returned. I don't have any resentments since I did my last work on resentments in 2008. I had some that had come up and I had been lazy and not paying attention. And once I sat down and did a laser focus column 3 and column 4 and did steps 4 through 9 on those 2 or 3 deep resentments on people that I was encountering, then that was removed and they've never returned. I have irritations, of course, like we all do, and annoyances occasionally, but nothing that destabilizes my serenity anymore. Because I did the column 4. There isn't a column 4 in the big book, but this man that I went through the steps with used the term column 4 for the final instructions on page 67, that second paragraph. There's 5 questions about my self-centeredness. What am I thinking? What am I doing? What is my fear? Where am I being dishonest? What is my role? Notice I didn't put what is my part. Nope, that's not what the big book says. That word part is not in the big book. What is my role? I like the term responsibility. What is my responsibility? I'm 100% responsible. Then we get to the 8th step, and there's lots of misinformation around the 8th step. People seem to interpret that if I have a resentment, I've created harm. The man who took me through the steps was able to help me correct my misperception. He said, Herb, you're not that powerful and you're not that important. Who did you diminish? That was a word that's not in the big book. Who did I harm? Who did I diminish? Financially, physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. Those words are in the 12 and 12. Those various dimensions where we might harm other people. Yes, we take a look at what we did, but what we did isn't the harm. Please hear that. Now, I'm challenging every one of you. When somebody asks you what's the harm done, don't tell them what you did. That's not the harm. It might have led to the harm, but the harm is really, what was the negative impact of what you did on them? How was their life diminished by you? How was their life? reduced, diminished, lacking in quality, the negative impact of you being in their life? What was the harm they received? And then take a look at, well, so now how do you repair that damage? We can't change history, but we can address it. We can regret it. The big book is very clear. Just don't say sorry. We've been doing that all our lives. I use the term regret a lot. And then ask yourself, are you willing? See, this is now bringing the conclusion to the forgiveness process. Is I'm going to repair the damage. Amend means two things. Amend means I'm going to change if I've created mischief from my infidelity. I'm not going to make amends for my infidelity until I stop my infidelity, or at least I'm making an effort to. Otherwise, I'm a hypocrite. It has no meaning. There's no authenticity to it. Step 6 and 7 were incredibly powerful. One of the more powerful experiences I had, distinguishing between my character defect, the inclination, and the behavior that came out of it. I am powerless over the inclination, the instinct, but I am 100% responsible for the behavior that manifests as a result of that instinct and inclination. I pray to be changed with regard to the inclination. I hold myself accountable for the behavior, and the 1-2 punch of prayer and accountability removed the behavior within 24 hours, my personal experience, and removed the inclination after about 2 years. If you want to change, identify specifically what change you want. What's the source of the irritation, the inclination, the instinct, and how is it manifest in behavior? Pray each day specifically for its removal. It's not in the big book, it's my experience. Pray specifically for the removal of the inclination and the change in behavior, but then hold yourself accountable either daily or weekly or monthly, depending on the severity of the character defect. Hold yourself accountable daily, weekly, or monthly to someone specifically and transparently for what you're doing. You will be changed unless you stop praying and holding yourself accountable. How free do you want to be? Which brings us to the final phase of the forgiveness process, is you meet with, or you talk with, or you write to people who you got approval, literally, from your step guide or your sponsor, that's the approach to the amends process. You describe the harm that you've done, and then you go quiet after asking the question, is there anything else that I didn't mention that I want, that you want to mention? I have a YouTube discussion about steps 8 and 9. I have a YouTube discussion about forgiveness, including steps 8 and 9. And so you can find those if you want some additional description. Each of them is over 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. So obviously it's broader and deeper than I'm going right now. And then suggest the amends to repair the damage. If I borrowed $20,000, I'm going to pay back $20,000. I'm willing to. If they ask for compounded interest, I'm going to pay the money back with interest. It's about repairing the damage. Money is the easiest part. How do you repair the damage of infidelity? How do you repair the damage of emotional abuse? How do you repair the damage in your history? How you diminished the people closest to you, but also many other people. Each one, There's no cookie cutter here. Each one needs to be reviewed in prayer and with guidance of an experienced person. And then that final question, like number 2, is there anything else that would balance the scale of justice? I keep in mind the model of Lady Justice, blind Lady Justice with the scale. What will balance the scale? I got that from Chuck C's book, New Pair of Glasses. Is there anything else that you would like me to do to make things right? You don't necessarily have to follow their suggestion, because there's lots of people that are not balanced emotionally or mentally, but it's wonderful to ask them to hear it and then to pause and talk about it with an experienced person if you have any doubt about it. What we're looking at is bondage of self. Addiction's an issue that's been resolved through the completion of the 9th step. At some point, you are given the grace of freedom, placed in a position of neutrality. Now we're addressing unmanageability, that self-will, extreme example of self-will run riot. And Bill says on page 62, we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. We're as powerless over our unmanageability as we are over our addiction. That's the translation. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. It's the same phrase in a different context on page 43. There'll come a time and a place we'll have no mental defense against the first drink. In regard to our addiction, page 43, with regard to our unmanageability, page 62, powerless, meaning we don't have sufficient effective human power. This is, of course, the assumption underneath the 12-step process, that spiritual process, that process of being in alignment with life, being in alignment with myself, being in alignment with other people, because I want to be free. Now take a look at the cartoon. There's no walls, there's no ceiling, there's no floor. There's just pathetic Herbie holding the bars in front of his face, not realizing that he's holding the bars in front of his face, and all he has to do is identify that he's holding the bars in front of his face and drop the bars. To release and to be released. Forgiveness is a process. It's a decision to release them and to be released. That's the heart of the matter. It gets more complicated, of course. But there's a lot of confusion and ignorance, meaning not knowing, around forgiveness. You can read the words. It's not to condone or forget or tolerate. It's not even to reconcile. You don't need to reconcile and have a relationship with people that you don't want to have a relationship with. But we are suggesting as a process that you develop forgiveness, meaning releasing them, which is not to retaliate or exact revenge or seek compensation or judge. It's a decision to release them. Look at my hand. Forgiveness, a decision to release. That's such a great image. I got it when I looked up the word in the dictionary. A decision to release. That gives me the real sense of the flow of it. Open my heart and open my mind and be willing to be willing. And the paradox is, once we release them, we are released. That's the paradox that's captured in the Lord's Prayer, written 2,000 years ago, or in the St. Francis prayer, written 200 years ago. To the extent that we release them from their debts, we are released from our debts. To the extent that we forgive them, we are forgiven, respectively. The Lord's Prayer and the St. Francis prayer. Centuries apart, two different cultures, but of course the dynamic is the same because it's a human dynamic. This is Fred Luskin's process, and you'll see how it corresponds to the process I've just outlined from the 12 steps. That first stage is to name it. What is your hurt? To understand it. What was the hope that you had that was dashed as the result of your relationship with the circumstances or the event or the people that betrayed you or hurt you? What were the rules? Fred has a great phrase. He calls it unenforceable rules. In the big book, we would look at them as beliefs and shoulds. Those words aren't in there, but those are the words I use for the third column. As you heard me give you a quick summary of it. What are my beliefs and shoulds? Those are the lenses through which I look. I can't see the lenses through which I'm looking because the lenses are that through which I am looking. It's a bit tricky. But what it says is I need to regrind my lenses, or I need a new pair of glasses. I need a reframing of my story. I need to challenge my beliefs to see mine were delusional, embarrassingly so. To acknowledge reality as it is. What are my attitudes and motives? Fourth column. What is that which drives me? Motives coming from the Latin word movere. What moves me? Selfishness, self-centeredness were the 5 questions that were asked that I reviewed in the 4th column a little earlier. Bill says selfishness, self-centeredness is the root. Of course, the fruit of the root is my resentment. I'm not getting what I wanted because I believe I'm entitled and I'm special and I'm unique and I'm not. Oh, as an individual, I am unique. But I am not the center of the universe. I'm the center of my universe. Quite different attitude. I was able to see that I am responsible for my thoughts, my feelings, and especially my behavior. To accept reality as it is, and that my decisions all have consequences. My decisions to take action all have consequences, and the consequences are my responsibility. If I don't like the consequences, then change my behavior. If I don't like my behavior, then check my attitude, my feelings, my thoughts, my emotions, my reactions. And course correct. That's the 10th step. I believe it's the tool of emotional sobriety. I have the opportunity when disturbed to course correct. To change, amend, to become faithful, to repair the damage, to have a lifetime of dedication to making her life more comfortable, not in a codependency way, but in a healthy way. Not necessarily talking about it, but living it. How free do you want to be? That's really the question behind forgiveness. How free do you want to be? All right. Fred is with us. All right. Thank you. Fred?
Hello, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I don't know when you came and on. I introduced you fairly extensively at the beginning, knowing that you would not be here for a while. And so you're welcome to just pick it up where you want. I've given them a review of steps 4 through 9 in terms of the tools for forgiveness.
I was watching some of what you did. So,
all right. Excellent.
Hello, everyone. I'm a forgiveness teacher in part from Stanford. I know some of you have heard me talk before. I've watched the few times I've done this, what Herb presents, and I don't think there's much difference in approach. My work has been empirical. I mean, we've done some research on it. I'm a licensed therapist. My spirituality may be more diffuse, but I think we're barking up the same tree, is my guess. But what I told Herb I would come on and talk about today for a period of time is like the practical aspect of it, the flat out necessity. And I know this is not at variance with 12-step programs at all, but the flat out necessity to do the work. And I mean, I get invited to all sorts of places, and I don't know how to, I've done a lot of talks in a lot of places. This is a decision, as Herb has said, and in fact, the research suggests that there are two parts to forgiveness. One being decisional, the second being what that researcher calls emotional, which means you bring it down into your body. But the first part is you make a decision. And that's not easy, and it's not trivial, but it's a decision. The part that not most interest, but I told Herb that I would come back and talk about is the effort part, the practice part, the, how would I put it? The fact that like you don't change unless you make an effort to change and you do practices to sustain that change. As a psychologist, that's probably my primary interest, is like, how do you get folks to get off their duff and do something? I mean, I'm going to say in the most unflattering kind of language that I can have, that's it. One of the things that, like, and I know Herb and I share this because I heard him say, you choose what you do, you take the responsibilities, and if you want to change your future, you change your present. I mean, that's kind of but the piece that is hard for people is to recognize that when you choose to stay the same and not change, you're actively choosing, even though you have a huge habit behind you. That we tend to, I mean, that old, a body at rest, well, tends to remain at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. It's really hard for human beings to change and grow. And we don't do it easily, and we often don't do it without resistance. But the piece that's needed to understand is when you continue acting the same way, you're choosing to. It's not so simple because you have a huge amount of momentum around the choice. I mean, a huge amount of momentum because you've done it the same way so many times. But with forgiveness, we have to make that decisional thing that my life will be better if I stop ruminating and blaming. And then I have to do the work. And I don't come at this in the same way as the 12-step program. Right? What I mean by do the work is practice. That's what I mean, is practice. Practice whatever it is that you need to do differently. Practice. So if you need to think differently, you practice thinking differently. If you need to act differently, you practice acting differently. If you need to feel differently, you practice feeling differently. You have to practice. And that takes a lot of the, unfortunately, the bullshit blame away. Because then it becomes a question of what am I willing to practice and how much am I willing to practice and how meaningful is my practice. It also means that it doesn't happen in an hour. You got the decision and then you got the practice. The startling gap that we found with forgiveness was when the decision really takes hold, you start to see your setbacks as part of the decision. Before the decision really takes hold, you see your setbacks as affirming the way you were in the past. So if you or I were really upset because of the way our ex treated us, and we make a decision, I'm going to forgive the schmuck. So, which I've had people tell me as an example of forgiveness, and I've chuckled a little bit and said, well, you may have a little room to go in your forgiveness. I've had people tell me they've forgiven the asshole and the jerk and the piece of shit. and I've tried to hint back at them, well, maybe that decision doesn't go as deep as you might like, because it does indicate the choice of words, some room to maneuver. But let's say you've decided to forgive the shithead. And then the next week, the shithead shows up late for the kids. And you get upset at the shithead. And before the decision really has taken impact, your being upset proves to you the guy's really a shithead. When the decision has really taken hold, it's, wow, I have more work to do. And that's the fulcrum for all of this. It's how deep is your decision. So I'm sure the same thing has to do with not drinking or using substances. When your decision doesn't really mean anything, you just go back to the same excuses. When the decision has some legs, it's, wow, okay, this is showing me there's still room for growth. I have stuff to learn, whatever it is. The setback becomes part of the process. But with forgiveness, the key piece is I decide that I don't want to blame something else for my life. That's what it is. Like, I don't want to, it's not helpful to me to continue to blame something or the past or someone else for the current state of my life. When you make the decision to forgive, because you figure, you get to understand that that's the only way that I have a chance to get my life back, is to decouple my blame from my life. I still have my crappy life, but at least now it's my responsibility. And that's a huge difference. I mean, just huge. I still have my crappy life, but it's mine, rather than partly theirs. I got the same crappy life. Deciding to forgive doesn't make your life great. It just takes away one of the biggest obstacles for keeping it crappy. And that's huge. But the key piece is, how deep is your decision? And as you know, any of you know, having worked in any way with, addictions, nobody ends an addiction on the first shot. Maybe not nobody, but very, very few people. I think when I was still part of that world, I mean, the average number of relapses was in the 20s. And that's not big relapses, but that's just how many times it makes making that decision before it actually means anything. And then you get to a point where you made the decision and there isn't any turning back. But the way that the decision manifests is through practice, which is why these 12-step programs are so good, because they force you to practice. They force you to do something. And I just, like, there's no, like, kumbaya shortcut. Okay, we've all decided to forgive and now everything's good and peace, love, and granola will rule the universe and stuff like that. That simply ain't true. We make the decision and now we have to do the practice. But it's practice. And the thing that humans do not understand, because we don't want to, is the recognition that we're always practicing. So when we say it's really hard to change, we're speaking flat out truth. I mean, it's really hard to change. But one of the reasons it's really hard to change is that we keep on practicing the same old stuff. And when you keep on practicing unforgiveness, no matter what you say your decision is, you're making it harder. So when you decide to forgive your ex, unfortunately, if the decision is real, you can't call him shithead anymore. You can, but it means that you're violating your decision. He may still be a shithead, but you've decided to get off the shithead mobile because it's to save you. So then you have to practice changing your vocabulary towards him. So you can go from shithead, you can try to lower that a little bit to piece of shit. You know what I mean? Just notch it down a half an inch, because he's not a complete shithead, he's just a piece of shit. And then you can notch that down to asshole, and then jerk. And then after a while, you start to recognize that all you're doing by saying nasty things about him is polluting your own stream. That's all you're doing. But it's what you're practicing. So practice means that that's how you know you've made a decision. I mean, we can decide all sorts of things. It just doesn't mean anything until we really practice. And the practice of forgiveness, I believe, is what frees us. And I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters that much what practices one does. I mean, I'm not somebody who's just so enamored with my own whatever, that these are the, that guy, oh my God, you do mine or you do nothing. I don't buy that at all. The decision matters, and then the practice matters. You got to do both. But there are some really great Buddhists out there who forgive, and there's some really great people who don't believe in anything but forgive. So none of our methods is in and of itself better necessarily. I mean, some have better data behind them. So like I went to, I gave a talk once, I think North Carolina, and this was 20 years ago. And again, I was giving a talk on forgiveness, and I was in a semi-small town in North Carolina. And somebody there, they were talking about how like they're in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And I had been somewhere else that had also said that they were in the buckle of the Bible Belt. So I figured it's a big buckle. But no, somebody like in Tennessee had said that, but they were really trying to impress me. And then one woman said, oh, this is great, this forgiveness stuff, because all I would do to forgive, being here in the Bible Belt, was say, Satan, get thee behind me. And it didn't work very well. I mean, it just wasn't that effective. Now, are there people who have forgiven by saying, Satan, get thee behind me? I'm sure there are. I'm certain of it. But if you gave 100 people that instruction compared to maybe the 12-step programs or my program, you'd probably get more people successful from these programs than from saying, Satan, get thee behind me. But if you're a firm believer in Satan, get thee behind me, it works. As long as you practice. And that's critical. You have to practice. No matter what it is, you have to practice. So for us, in our forgiveness work, we have, I'm going to say, 4 primary practices. And I think Herb went through most of them, but I want to emphasize to you, it's practice. Practice, 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 practice. So one of the practices is calm down. Like when you're upset about your ex or whatever, chill. Seriously, chill. Take a deep breath, take a walk. Remember you're loved. Whatever positive thing you can do to help you chill, lower your blood pressure. And I'm being partly facetious and partly just flat out accurate. You gotta chill when you're upset if you want to grow through things. You have to chill when you're upset, otherwise you will not heal. So you can say, Satan, get thee behind me, if that helps you chill. I'm not minimizing this. I mean, there are better psychophysiologic methods of meditation and prayer, maybe, that work, but Satan's good. You just got to do something every time. And it doesn't have to take long, but you got to do it. That's the thing. You got to make it a practice. So let me just do a moment meditation. on that. Not on Satan, get thee behind me, because I'm not trained to do that. But I really am a believer in all sorts of diverse practices. I mean that. I am a firm believer in this is a big wiggly world, and there are so many ways that people in this big wiggly world have figured out the same thing. So if you would all just take a moment and close your eyes. And give yourself, please, permission to relax. And there is a cognitive element in all relaxation, all. You have to clear the decks, which is why it often doesn't work, is because we don't actually clear the deck. And then take maybe 2 or 3 slow breaths into and out of your abdomen. And when you inhale, make sure your abdomen expands. And then just bring an image to your mind of someone you love. These are universal, simple practices, but just bring an image to your mind of someone you love. And that's sufficient. Take one more breath. Let go of the image and the feeling, and just gently allow your eyes to open. So what I'm suggesting is, and we have demonstrated that has tremendous value, when you feel like calling somebody a shithead, take a couple of breaths and remember love. And do that as a practice. If you want to forgive, if you want to heal yourself, if you want to stay angry, or if you want to stay in the role of victim, don't do this. No, really, it'll ruin your, if you want to stay a pissed off victim, do not do this. Should have a big warning on the cover. But when you recognize that your arousal is your problem, it's not their problem, it's not the past problem, it's your problem. You're upset. You're the only one who can soothe you. Because you don't want to be soothed or don't know how to be soothed, you have a grudge. It's the past's fault. It's my mother's fault for not loving me enough when I was 9, even though I'm 70. It's like sometimes I heard people say this stuff, and I wonder if they're not testing my sense of humor. Honestly, I have senior citizens tell me it's their mother's fault. I'm thinking, where do they get this garbage from? And it might have been true when they were 20. But at some point, and this is, I'm sure Herb and I agree 100%, it's your life. Good, better, and different. It's your life. And you can ruin any moment of it by blaming anybody you want at any time for anything. You have that complete freedom to blame, to ruin any moment of your day that you choose. Anytime. You can ruin the best moment of your life. You could ruin your marriage. You could ruin your kid's graduation. You could ruin getting a Nobel Prize if you wanted to by holding a grudge. It's your freedom. Nobody can take that from you. And most of us have practiced it to the hilt. It's not my fault I came out such a, whatever. It's my mother's fault. It's my father's fault. It's grandma's fault. It's my drinking's fault. It's my ex's fault. My kids don't call me enough fault, whatever it is. So when you forgive, it just becomes your life. That's all you're doing. You're removing the prop of blame and victimhood from your defenses. So one of the prime ways of doing that is when you're upset, relax. Let me practice that same thing once again, but a little more real time. Okay. So again, please close your eyes. And what I'd like you to do is picture something in your life that you don't like, that you haven't forgiven. Picture something in your life that you haven't forgiven. Picture something. Feel it for a moment. Feel the tension, the negativity, whatever it is, just feel it for a moment and recognize its familiarity. And then once that's clear, bring your attention to your belly and take 2 slow, deep breaths into and out of that belly. 2 slow, deep breaths. And then when you've taken those 2 slow, deep breaths, picture something or someone that you dearly love. And that's enough. And then just let that go. Take a breath, return, and very gently open your eyes. Now, if you will practice that 45 seconds, which you can shrink down to about 10 seconds with practice. No, I'm serious. It doesn't have to be a big practice, because once you've taught your nervous system how to do it, it doesn't take that much effort. But you have to practice. You have to practice training your nervous system. so that it recognizes the stimulus of safety, not threat. Safety, not threat. You're safe when you're breathing into and out of your belly and remembering love. When you're remembering how somebody didn't love you or lied to you or cheated to you or whatever, you're remembering threat. And so you're all upset. And every human responds badly to threat. And so you want to shift out of threat. In part, I'm going to say, because you're worth it. It's a form of self-care. But you have to practice. Like, that's the tough part. And before you've made the decision to really forgive, when you feel threatened because you remember your ex, you'll think, wow, okay, I'm remembering X and I don't like it. They really are a terrible person. And so you'll have another reason to not like them. Only when you've decided that you don't want that in you will you practice. You'll practice. And you'll practice calming yourself down. And you'll practice releasing the grudge for that moment. Because that's all you can release it for, is that moment. You can release it for that moment. But when you release it for this moment, and then the moment that occurs an hour from now, and then the moment tomorrow, and then the moment the next day, when you practice, you've practiced setting the condition so your brain can forgive. But you have to practice. Another practice, very simple, is when you find yourself telling your friends what shithead has done. Instead of using the word shithead, say somebody who hurts me, that I haven't forgiven. And if you do that 50 times, you'll have a huge change. Because every time you say shithead, you're defending your reaction. It's because they're this, that you're that. It's very subtle. It's very persistent. And it's very dangerous for your well-being. One of the things that that we found is that, well, not just us, but researchers have found that the more blame you have, it tends to manifest as physical illness. That blame itself is a physically destructive quality because it's both angry and helpless, which are not good combinations for your being. So whenever you practice blame or practice victimhood, you're practicing helplessness. And of course that has an impact. Of course. So you have to practice something healthier for you. You're not necessarily immediately practicing forgiveness, but you're practicing self-care that's healthier for you. But over time, that self-care matters. It really does matter. So my thinking is that we have to work at this. Like it's not, how would I say? It's not something that comes just because you're just because you choose to or decide to. You have to do things. You have to change your thinking, feeling, behaving, way you self-regulate. You have to do something regularly that will change you. So the easiest is, change your physiology through relaxation. The hardest is actually forgiving. So there's lots of spaces in between there for practice. The easiest is just calm down. Like just relax. Like the world is okay. You don't have to remember again that in 1996 somebody lied to you. You're not of any value to this world by doing that. You're offering nothing useful whatsoever. That's the funny part. We think we're contributing to world peace by like remembering how much hatred we have. We want to congratulate ourselves by saying, oh yeah, we're really taking a stand against evil. Look at us. We are really important people, which is idiotic. We're not doing anything of value whatsoever, except maybe raising our blood pressure and reminding ourselves that we're not safe. If you think those are great contributions to the world, go ahead. Calm down's the first and easiest. Just calm down. When you're upset, calm down, quiet down, take a breath. The second is watch your language. What are you calling them? How do you relate to the experience? How do you even relate to yourself? Watch your language. Do you curse? Do you blame? Do you bitch all the time about something? The hard news is that's all on you. All of it. No matter what somebody else did in the past, except for like if it's 2 weeks later when it is absolutely legitimate and helpful to bitch like crazy. It's in fact a sign of mental health. Victimhood is an essential part of healing. It's not my fault. They're terrible people. That truth needs to be lived too. It just only needs to be lived at the right time and for the right amount of time. But it is essential for your brain's ability to handle these kind of things. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross might refer to that as, her part of the process, which is you have denial and you have depression and you have anger, all the ways that your brain needs to reorganize to handle what happened. So it is not trivial and it is not a bad thing to feel terribly victimized for a while. The normal course of grieving, it goes away and you become back to health. When during grief, you don't go through the process well, that's where a grudge comes from. You get stuck in one of these ineffective but necessary strategies. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says clearly that it's essential to go through some pain when you're hurt. Seriously, it's essential. Forgiveness means it's also essential to get out of it. It's essential, both. But we don't necessarily relate so well to the parts that we have to practice to move on. So one is quiet yourself down. Two is watch some of those words you use when you describe other human beings. And recognize that you can't call somebody an asshole without raising your blood pressure. You can't do it. So you then recognize that you're choosing to raise your blood pressure because you think what they did is so bad that you're willing to suffer for it endlessly. Look at what this is. It's a form of like communal insanity. That I'm willing to ruin my day because something or someone was awful in the past, and it is absolutely essential to deal with that awfulness, and it's absolutely essential to move past it. But it doesn't mean that there's like you're a bad person or you've done something wrong by being upset. I believe being upset is part of your brain's need to return to homeostasis. You can't get there otherwise. And it's like you're putting yourself in a washing machine when somebody shakes up your world. You're being shaken, really shaken. And it's not easy. And don't kid yourself that it's easy. But grief is essential. If you carry some bad habits from grief forward, only practice after decision will make them go away. Decision's not enough. Good intention's not enough. Awareness is not enough. It's a real decision and practice. So again, 1 is calm down. 2 is watch your speech. Do you have friends that you like to get together and discuss how the assholes in your life are? You're not going to heal that way. If you don't have a friend for the year after somebody does something terrible to you to discuss how the assholes are, you may not heal either. That's the conundrum of this. You need it for a while, and then you need to stop. That's what makes this so challenging. You do need it, and then you need to stop. And that is no easy thing. You know, I've been teaching this stuff for a long time. And I'm sure Herb's been doing what he does for a long time. And we both practice whatever we believe in on ourselves. So we know it's not easy. This is not a, let's everybody get together. And like, I worked in a kind of new agey graduate school for a while to train therapists. And I remember there was a time when they had a lot of like really young new agey people wanting to be therapists. And they'd write out treatment plans for people with mental illness. Well, if they meditate twice a day, or they do some creative expression, like they'll heal. And that's all wish fulfillment. It's nonsense. And there's not creative expression and meditation are wonderful. But you have to practice in your life. You have to make certain decisions in your life that you're going to change things about you. The third practice, so simple, is the alternative to forgiveness is gratitude. That's all. That's what you got as the poles. You either argue with life or you say thank you. You either say, this experience is bad, so I'm going to argue with it. Or you say, this experience is good, and thank you. Or maybe this experience is just neutral. But you got unforgiveness, and you got thank you. Right? It's not that complicated. But we like to confuse ourselves by making believe again we're in great service to the goodness of this world by finding things wrong with this world. And we think that's one of our gifts. And so arguing and fighting and complaining, that's all fine. But the practice is to be more grateful. So you balance out the arguing. You can't stop the arguing. You need it. I'm not saying you need to argue, but everyone will have things in their life to argue about. You also need lots of things in your life to say thank you for. And you need to cultivate that if you want to become more forgiving. Otherwise, the shit in the world is too apparent. It is. You got to work to balance it. And I'm not saying anything that you haven't heard multiple times before. But if you wake up in the morning and you think, poor me, I had crappy parents. Well, that's starting yourself off for a bad day. Especially since there's nothing your parents can do anymore to help you. That's on you. Or your ex-partner who's now happy with the person half their age. There ain't nothing that they can do for you now that's going to make it better for you. You have to do it. So one of the ways that we can do this is the words thank you. So again, you wake up in the morning, my parents didn't treat me right. But you also notice that it's beautiful outside. So now you got a choice. Did I have crappy parents or was it beautiful outside? What kind of day do I want? Do I ever want to forgive those crappy parents, or do I want to just remind myself every day how crappy my parents were? That's my choice. It's not, I'm not saying, what I want to be very clear is I'm not saying that people didn't have crappy parents. But I am saying when you wake up today, you have a choice. Do I focus on my crappy parents? Do I focus on it's a beautiful day? And if we give, this is the key piece. This is the whole essence of forgiveness and unforgiveness. If we give those crappy parents the power to ruin our morning, it's not their fault. That's the whole teaching. If we give our crappy parents or crappy ex or a crappy country or a crappy president, whatever it is we want to give the power to ruin our day, that's not their fault. We're choosing that attention. That's the simplest decision point that we have. When I wake up during the day, how much time do I say, I had crappy parents. You can't expect me to be an adult. My dad was an alcoholic. I can't function. You can say that and ruin your life, but it's not their fault. That's the thing. Nobody's saying that having a crappy alcoholic father is a good way to grow up. Nobody. It's just that how long do you give yourself that excuse for not functioning? I mean, this is not a defense of crappy fathers or crappy mothers or crappy exes or crappy bosses or even crappy cultures. It's no defense of that. Which is why I believe grief includes really seeing how crappy things can be so you can do something about it. But blaming those crappy things for why you have a crappy life, that's not so smart. So it's easier to add gratitude than it is to try to redeem crappy people. So if you woke up this morning and you had a bed to sleep on and running water and food in the refrigerator, it's not so bad. You may still have had a crappy dad. But what do you pay attention to? Do you blame your crappy dad for the fact that you can't appreciate the fact that you have running water, food, and clothing? That's fine. There's a lot of dead people who still stop other people from appreciating their lives. But the gratitude piece is essential. That and our speech and our self-regulation, we have entire control over. Not entire, say 80%. So let me do a couple of simple gratitude meditations. Very simple. If you'd all please, again, just close your eyes. Short practices, as you see. Just please allow your eyes to close. And just take again a couple of slow breaths. And when you inhale, have your abdomen get bigger. I can't overemphasize how important that is for making you safe. When you inhale, have your abdomen expand. When you exhale, have your abdomen contract. And then maybe after 2 or 3 breaths, with the next inhalation, just say thank you for the fact that you're alive and breathing. Say thank you. Inside of you, just thank you. And try to feel thank you. Try to feel it as you think it, for being alive and breathing. Thank you. And then almost try to fill your heart with thank you for all that being alive brings. Like you can love and you can walk and you can eat and you can talk. What tremendous like gifts. I mean, just pay attention. And then just again, take a breath and let that go. Very gently, let the feeling and thought go. And just allow your eyes to open. So if you want to put your life in perspective so that you're more likely to forgive, look for things to be thankful for. The simplest is that you're here and alive for a while, and that you can guarantee in a certain number of years you won't be. Like you can bring that to the bank. So you want to, at some level, ask yourself, how much do I want the past to interfere with my ability to experience my present? How much am I willing to sacrifice of my opportunities to have a decent life now by focusing on what went wrong in the past? It's really hard to argue that out, but it's not as hard to say thank you with what you have and let that start to balance it. Thank you. The other piece of that is the practice of teaching yourself to find good in what other people do. So if you have a life partner and they do the dishes, or they get the gas, or they help with the kids, it's a really good idea to remind yourself to say thank you. Very, very simple practice, but it helps you have less grudges. So I know you don't do X, Y, and Z. I know that. But you do A, B, and C. And I want to make sure that I see A, B, and C so I don't exaggerate X, Y, and Z. That's what's quote crucial about our whole lives. So imagine if at a simple thing, we recognize that maybe we've been with somebody for 10 years, and for 10 years they listened to us, our garbage, and they still somehow show up, even though we are so full of crap and so annoying, just as they are. I mean, it's not like it's a one-way street, but we are really difficult and annoying, and they show up for 10 years and somehow come back for more, almost like a dog, that doesn't mind being mistreated. It's nice to say thank you, but not just say it, feel it. You don't have to show up. I'm awful. I mean, you're awful too. I mean, it's not me worse, but we're all crazy. Everybody, we're all crazy. So you show up somehow and put up with my particular kind of crazy. Thank you. You have a lot of your own crazy, but thank you. So that opens the heart up to be able to hold some of their crazy. The leading thinker on marital success, where they are now in their thinking, is when you get married, the best advice that they can give to people is choose the person whose problems you can tolerate. That's the best marital advice out there. Don't worry about the highs so much, because a lot of them will even out, and after a while you'll just take them for granted anyway. But what matters is, can you stick with their garbage? Can you make an informed consent knowing that they're a lazy slob? Are you willing to try to love them anyway? That is the single most important piece of advice for choosing a partner and for choosing to stay with a partner. You're choosing their weak points. You're choosing, the really bright people say, there's 20 people who could like their good points. They're charming and funny, but you're choosing to be the one to be okay with their bad points. And I think the same applies for life. Like a lot of people have an easy time with life's gifts, but the stronger among us forgive and make peace with the crap. But you will never do that if you don't notice the gifts. Because you'll just be inundated by crap. One more meditation, please. Let me just ask you one last time to close your eyes for a moment. Close your eyes and take again 2 slow, deep breaths from deep in your belly. Deep in your belly, slow, full, deep. And then ask yourself, like in the last 2 or 3 days, where have I seen kindness in my life? You want to ask yourself, has anybody been kind to me when I run back the tape? This is one of the most important life questions that you can ask yourself. Who was kind? Did anybody say kind things? Listen to me, have patience, help around the house, bring me anything. Where was kindness? You want to find it. You absolutely want to find it. Where was kindness? And then you want to pick one instance of that to say thank you to. You want to pick one example of kindness. And you want to literally, in your mind and heart, say thank you. And really, from your heart, feel thank you. And then let that go. Just hold the feeling and let that go. Just let it go. And then gently take a breath and allow your eyes to open. So it has to be noticed. Otherwise, you can't be grateful. You have to notice. You have to pay attention. You have to work at it. It's a practice. It's really a practice. All of these are simply things you practice. Quieting your body down and your mind. Being more open to goodness. These are practices. But you have to choose to practice, and it only comes when you make a decision, a real decision to move ahead. Otherwise, you won't practice. Well, you'll continue to practice what you always practiced. we always practice something. Always. So you'll continue what you've always practiced until you make a decision to shift your ship, so to speak. Watch the words that come out of your mouth. So one more practice is, what kind of story do you want to tell yourself in the world about your life? And this is one that you have 100% control over. Do you want a story of victimhood? Is that is that how you want to go out there and say, hey, look at me, I was mistreated? Is that the story that you or I think is our best shot at happiness? We control the story. We don't like that power. Most of us rebel against that. We control what comes out of our mouth as speech. It's a lot of responsibility. And at some level, it's very hard to live up to that degree of responsibility. If I yell at somebody, I chose to. It doesn't mean we can't make that choice. I mean, that's the complete freedom that we have. The issue is, what kind of story do we want to tell about our life? And there's nothing new in anything I'm saying, but at some level we can decide to tell a victim story. God, I just started out with nothing going my way, and and it's always been that way. I started out with 2 strikes against me, and now I'm finishing up with 2 strikes against me. Or I started out with 2 strikes against me, and I've had a long life learning how to recover from that. That's we have so many choices, but that's one of them. And the question is, what kind of story do we want to tell ourselves, which will influence how we relate to the world every day? So if your story is poor me, it hasn't been fair, then you're never going to get over your grudge because you believe that. You're never going to get over your grudge with life because you believe you've been treated unfairly. But if you say, I've had a lot of difficult experiences in my life that I've had to learn from, that's a totally different story. But the good news and the bad news is that you or I make the decision. So we suggest something that we call the positive intention story. And it can take a couple of different flavors, but the easiest one is, well, what did I need to learn from my difficulty? Like what did how I handled in my life show me my weaknesses? So if I had crappy parents, and then for 20 years I made terrible choices, then it shows me that I really needed to figure out how to handle my experiences, so I made better choices. Like that's what I needed. But the positive intention story is all about how it is that I learned about myself and what I needed to grow. And it doesn't mean that it's easy or a straight line. It can be for 40 years. It took me 40 years to recognize how poorly I was dealing with some of the things that had happened to me in life. But at some point, when we make a decision, the story shifts. And the story shifts to, well, this is how I used to deal with it. And now I'm trying to learn better methods of dealing with it. That's how the decision has the biggest impact on us. The decision has a big impact on us because we change our story. And that's where the rubber hits the road. We change our story. So our reality shifts. And when we make a decision that we want to forgive or move ahead or get on with things, then we now tell a different story. So the positive intention has two possibilities. One, what I learned about myself and how I needed to grow. Or two, how I can get what I needed that the obstacle or the grievance made hard. So if I had a terrible relationship and the person was abusive, the positive intention story is I need to get over this bad relationship so I can get a good one. It's that simple. Or I need to, end the dominance of my bad parents in my head, so maybe I can learn to reparent myself. We need to have a story that works for us. And we need to practice that story a lot. So since we may have 20 years practice of a bad story, the good news is a good story doesn't take that long to substitute. It doesn't take 20 years. It may take a week. That's the really good news. But we have to practice. We have to practice and practice and practice. So I used to say X. I've learned that Y is a much better story for me. Much better story for me. I am going to stop where I am. It's like 10 minutes to 1. That's enough me yakking at you. If there's a question for me, ask it if you wish. If there's a clarification, I'll do my best. Let me just reiterate what I said. Practice self-regulation, quieting down. Practice gratitude. Practice changing what comes out of your mouth. And change your story. Practice self-regulation. Practice gratitude. Be careful with what comes out of your mouth. And change your story. Those are simple but complex things. You can practice any of them starting this moment. That's the work that we've done, that's why it's so effective. There's no abstract anything. You just practice starting now. Like That's the crucial piece. You practice starting now. And you practice whatever you want. The default, the only counter is, since we're always practicing, we are responsible for the fruits of our practice. So we practice unforgiveness. It doesn't happen to us. We make a lot of strong efforts to be bitter. You want to practice things that lead in different directions. You know, and none of this is unusual or new. The Dalai Lama's book, The Art of Happiness, the whole book is predicated on this idea that if you want to be happy, you have to practice things that lead to happiness. If you want to be unhappy, you practice things that lead to unhappiness.
Is there any different advice if the hang up is more about regret of acts from the past, like a lot of regrets, as opposed to necessarily yes,
regrets about things that you did
or didn't do? Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things where I think our culture has gone off the rails is not recognizing the wonderful value of regret. It's a very important quality of being human. You know, when people ask me about self-forgiveness, I think Herb and I are doing another one later in the year on self-forgiveness. I think the problem for our culture now is too much self-forgiveness, not too little. That the world and people in it behave terribly, absolutely atrociously. And there's not nearly enough regret, guilt, remorse, or any of that stuff. So please don't think regret is a bad thing. Where it gets to be problematic in a kind of abstract thing, it's perfectly okay and useful to regret an action. What's not useful is condemning a self. So you're not a bad person because you do some things that are stupid or unskillful or harmful. But regretting the bad actions is not a terrible thing, as long as it doesn't lead you to decide that you're a bad person or that you can't be trusted or any of those other things. Okay?
Okay.
Regret is also not useful for years.
Kind of like the grief process. I could see it in the same dynamic.
Yeah. It's like really good. It can be really good for a couple of months to really look at yourself and recognize, I failed in a piece of a character test. Do I want to do better?
Yeah.
That's what's important, not regret. But regret often pushes us to that. So then the question is, and this is right in alignment with 12-step program, if I did some harm, make amends. Yeah. That's more important than regret. Right. Did I apologize? Did I sincerely apologize? If I did, and I made amends, and I've tried to change myself, I'm clean.
Yeah.
That's what's important. But to minimize regret before it's led to those things, not good.
Well, I think that's another point that you made, is be very careful of the vocabulary. And I want to comment the vocabulary of self-talk in your head, because I hear a lot of that self-loathing that comes from people, or that regret, or the whatever it is, but it's all inside. It's never vocalized. So it's about that self-talk and that self-image.
It was is that, I had a moment, let's say yesterday, with my husband, and he said something, and I grasped it, right, with the old story and the tentacles leading back to my childhood. And I leapt all over the comment he made. And I was observing
Carol,
it,
let me interrupt you already. if we have a reaction that goes back to our childhood, right? It's an indication that we need to probably apologize to our partners for not having forgiven our own lives and dumping it on them.
Okay.
That
Fair
it's
enough.
not their fault in any way that we're not healed.
Okay.
And
Even if what he did was rude.
If we're particularly open because we carry stuff from our past, we're actually the ones bringing harm, not them.
I do want to say too that I really appreciate the graphic nature with which you said, this is the choice you're making, or like, is this how you really want to live, to the choice, the decision of how I do want to live.
Yeah.
And that just in deciding that I don't want that in me, it's almost like trying to figure out how to be as grounded in as accepting I'm an alcoholic.
I would
You know what
also
I'm
be
saying?
I'd be very careful with the story at your age that still posits that a lot of it is from childhood. I'm going to tell you that a lot of it is from childhood, and a lot of it is from how you and I have practiced as adults for decades.
Sure.
And so
I was
you
better
have
at a different time,
it's
but
a
now
lot
I'm worse.
easier to change yourself and your habits. One of them being that I didn't start the fire, but I also didn't put it out.
Right.
And you want to be very careful, not acknowledging how each of us has taken our childhood wounds and then fanned the flames. So it shortens our speeches. I'm just, it like shortens how much we have to say. It's the real question is, whatever comes up now, how do I most skillfully handle it?
Skillfully. Another that, like Herb said, that's like
But that's the crucial question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I stop, I pause, I breathe in my belly, which has some kind of a physio-psycho connection, I'm guessing, whatever, some kind of a whatever. Stop and I pause and I breathe and what is my story? The one I'm creating, the one I decided to have. And then,
or even better, what story is it that I want to develop from this moment going forward?
Right.
Develop in that moment. Good.
Yeah.
And you can
skillful.
You can practice with different stories until you find one that serves you well.
Yeah.
Does that just fall into place, or is it something that's meditative?
Yes.
Different for everybody. Okay.
Hey, everybody, I gotta go.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to contact me for anything, I don't know, if you want to speak to me somehow privately, you have my email. Otherwise, Herb, thank you again. As always, I've enjoyed your group, and I look forward to seeing you again.
You bet, Fred. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I love I love your comment about the buttons. I think Alan is the one who said I'm the one walking around with a control panel on my chest, right? Here you go.
Right.
It was great seeing Dr. Luskin again. And I saw a quote yesterday that was so right on, and I wanted to get your input on it. It says, lately I've started thinking of the things my parents didn't do perfectly as variables that make me an individual rather than as trauma that makes me a patient. It's not healthy to walk through life identifying oneself as a victim and others as perpetrators. And that was so right on for me. And I love what he said about what we name it. And it makes me think that if I can call those things variables, I can choose to frame it as an opportunity rather than something that's persecuted me my whole life.
Well, and Dr. Berger, again, quoting him, talked in the context of character defects. He said, how about using the term default responses?
Mm,
And that's what Dr. Luskin was talking about, is the story that we have developed, we condition when we practice it. So the whole point is to reframe it by literally reconditioning ourselves almost forcefully, but without violence, by consciously thinking contrary thoughts, consciously feeling contrary feelings, consciously taking contrary actions. And that's not new vocabulary for anybody in a 12-step program. Yeah.
right. I love too, he talked about the setbacks and being able to reframe that rather than something.
Right.
It's like, oh,
right.
oh, ho, what's going on here? So great.
Right.
Great to see you guys. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have an idea for a book. I don't know whether I'll ever write it, but it's called Life is a Practice.
Yes. Hi, Herb. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dr. Luskin was amazing. And I'm going to ask what I was going to ask him, which is I had an experience with family recently, let's just say 6 months ago, and it's about language. And it shifted, like, it was like a loss of illusion, like, oh, this is really what's happening. And so in terms of language, I now call, because my father has children from a previous marriage, and she was sort of my sister, but she's a half sister. And now in speaking of her, I say my father's daughter, which is to me a clarification of the relationship. But I don't know if that's still like shithead or something or other.
No. Well, first of all, it didn't have a negative connotation unless you give it one.
No, it's just a shift in meaning. Like
I love it.
My mom, I have a very difficult time calling her mommy, like her mom. That just, it doesn't fit for what the relationship means to me. So that was it. Like, does that, my language, that was it. It just,
well, it's about it. What does it mean to you? He made a huge point. One of the points I like to make, and that's about intention. Words are critically important. And you notice he was Dr. Luskin, very careful with the use of words, making sure that they were clear words, that they weren't vague and poetry words. They were behaviorally oriented words. They were helping to clarify things. And that's, of course, one of the things I like to do, is be very careful. So I think what you're doing is helping you be clear about your communication, and then you'll hear the tone or you'll feel the feelings and you'll know whether or not it's clean.
okay.
Yeah.
Fair. That's good. Because it felt very, after my loss of illusion, it felt like, ew, that's a lie, sister. It connotes too much connection. That didn't exist. And so my father's daughter makes me feel like it's clean and less of a lie like my mom. I have a hard time.
It sounded very clear and clean when you said it. Okay. And even the tone that you used in it, because I pay attention to tone. No, it was very clean.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you so much for this. So helpful.
Thank you.
I was struck by the idea, the unmanageability, right? And that if I'm as grounded in the unmanageability of non-forgiveness, and if that is one of those things that I would have to say I'm powerless over, and my life's unmanageable around this because it's here, it's with my husband, it's there with my parents, whatever, and that in moving forward with that idea of the unmanageability and wanting to forgive and wanting to fucking get rid of this shit, that I have to be as grounded in the idea of that unmanageability as I do in being an alcoholic or,
probably more so.
Okay.
Well, because unmanageability is the warp and woof of our human nature. Addiction happens to be almost an accident of genetics. And so it's much more pandemic and much more difficult to deal with because it's so subtle. And that's why his emphasis, well, and the word I used for his emphasis was unconsciousness. How many times did he say pay attention?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have the experience where, like, so in therapy as well, my therapist will say, here's the circumstance and here's your reaction. Here's the feeling. You're in the feeling of it, and then your reaction. And she wants me to stay still in the feeling of it
Yes.
and pause there
Yes.
so that I can act consciously, right? But I have to be in my body to feel the
You have
feelings.
to be in the feelings and use the feeling as a signal.
Mm-hmm.
It's telling you something. Yes, it's a biochemical reaction to your perception that is telling. He used the term many times about safety.
Yeah. That was the other part too. Is like, take a deep breath into your belly, and that somehow there's a connection between the slowing down and feeling safe, because I react out of not feeling safe. That's the thing, right? So
the thing. Yeah.
I want to get to that where I'm more grounded in the consciousness of the unmanageability here.
Yep.
And it's just a matter of practice then. Yeah.
And from my standpoint, the key practice is step 11. That's
Prayer and
the
meditation.
proving. Well, let's not get wrapped around the vocabulary. Let's just look at what is step 11 from my standpoint, and I'll include the perspective that is the secular perspective from Dr. Luskin's standpoint, and mine from just the 12 steps. It's about improving my consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to think about conscious contact with God. Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's good and all of that. No, I want to be as conscious as possible. And when I'm paying attention to the dynamics of my feelings, then I can, he used the term again, self-regulate, come to grips with those. So what are those feelings telling me? Well, they're telling me that I don't feel safe, or that my ego has been wounded. Well, what's that telling me? Herb, you're out of alignment again, because in fact, you're not that important.
It's hard being a human being. I just, you know what I mean?
No, it's not. It's not hard.
Okay, it's not. I'm changing my language.
Wait. It's hard to be a conscious human being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. No. All the news is filled with people who are being all too human, but they're not conscious.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you have chosen the road less traveled. I know.
We talked about the bitch of enlightenment, so yeah. I only know that, like, for myself, that there's a just discomfort of being in the world, right?
Yeah.
And it's me. It's my discomfort.
Yeah.
And that it's going to be me that addresses it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're part of the process. So thank you.
I am stating right now in front of you and the universe and everybody that tomorrow I'm going to tell my sponsor that I'm going to write down my story in 30 words or less, and then write down the one that I want. I'm not going to be the guy whose life was ruined because I fought the law and the law won. My big resentment.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the guy who rose above adversity, and those troubles quenched my steel like a fine blade.
All right. Well, but it might be better for you to have less of a poetic ambition and more of an authentic truth ambition.
Well, yes, I'm still angry. This is what I discovered day before yesterday. I was watching these hearings that they're having at the Capitol, and I got upset. For 20 seconds, I was like, well, I gotta take all those guys.
You know the answer to that? Stop watching.
I'm going to take a stance and argue that that might not be the best thing, that whether I purposely watch this kind of stuff or not, it's going to appear in front of my eyes eventually. And I can't be reacting like that to these
I
things.
record what I think I want to watch so that I can fast forward parts of it that I don't want to watch. I want to be informed, but I don't want to be propagandized.
Okay.
All right. So
Well,
I'm in charge of what I take in.
it's true. It's true. But I'm like, I got to get out of step 4, which means I have these things that anger me. Like, and frankly, it was just a brief little flash. I was smart enough to go, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you doing? You're not going to sit around all afternoon going, rah, 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 rah,
Right.
yourself.
Well,
Right.
depends on how you entertain yourself.
Well, what I did do was my second favorite musician had this disc for sale on his site.
Nice.
I got it and the last cut on it, and I have no idea why he's selling these. It's got
Yeah.
this, and everything else is his
Yeah.
stuff. The last cut is Amazing Grace on bagpipes. And
Oh,
I cried.
I
And
want
that's your
that
fault.
at my funeral. I want bagpipes and Amazing Grace. That's right.
So I had a musical epiphany about how important music is for
Oh,
humanity. And
tear your heart out.
you can't send people off to war without John Philip Sousa, right? Otherwise, they're not going to go, right? So how important music is to humanity. I'm just going to close on that note.
To comment that one of the biggest changes in my life was saying my daughter instead of my child. My daughter is 42 years old.
Yeah.
And if I say my daughter, I accept her as an adult. If
That's
I say
very
my
significant.
child,
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I love that. That's a wonderful insight. Thank you for the words and the thought. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
okay, that's all. Thanks.
All right.
A pleasure for Dr. Luskin and for you to review the forgiveness steps. I have changed my story. Several months ago, I read the book and went through it, and but this was really a good, refreshing
Oh, it was.
for me, because even though I changed my story, the ends were getting loose now. So I have to go back and with positive intention and revive it, because incrementally I run into this problem, and the story wasn't as firm in my head. In other words, this person's still renting space in my head. I like the way he put that. And so now I, as we were going through, I really liked the idea where I will have positive intention. I will look at this and get up in the morning and decide that I will make a decision to have a healthy, positive relationship with my story and the way I perceive it. So thanks.
Yeah. And just for today, I can now write a new chapter in my story, and I can create the theme and the attitude. That's really good. I like it. Yeah.
I was wondering where the intersection of the forgiveness and, like, when you're dealing with a child, and I have a sponsee and I have myself too, of that's in the throes of an addiction, and heavily in the throes of the addiction, adult child. How does the forgiveness or changing the story work with that, with a child that just, it makes you so sad and everything else, but
what's the story? Wait. What's the story?
A child that's in addiction.
Are we talking about a child literally
Yeah.
under 18 years old?
No, an adult.
So we're talking about an adult with addiction.
An adult daughter or adult son. Yes.
with an addiction. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the story is this person has, and yes, of course you can be sad about it, but it is what it is, isn't it? And you know that from your own addiction.
Mhm.
Yeah. So tell me, maybe what is the
I
question?
guess I mean, I find that with my sponsee, we keep going back to, that involvement and and I'm trying to put some of Fred's Luskin's things to it of put a better thought in your mind and put a better, that kind of thing. And
Are you talking about a person that you sponsor that has an adult child and you've recommended they go to Al-Anon and participate actively in Al-Anon?
which they do, yes.
Wonderful, good.
But you still stay so much in that mess that is your child's, they reach out, they do all this stuff.
Oh,
And
nobody says it's going to be easy.
okay.
They put it in. I mean, I'm not sure what I would do was I in the same situation. So I don't want to be glib about it, but isn't that what they call tough love? And detachment with love?
Mhm.
As I say, I'm not coming from experience. I'm coming from repeating what I hear from other people's experience, and it sounds horrible to me. I can't imagine how I would, deal with it because I don't have to deal with it. But those are the words that people use, and their 20-year-old daughter is on the front porch after 3 years of prostituting herself and heroin use, and she's saying, "Mom, Mom, Mom, I'm hungry and I have no place to live and I'm going to die if you don't let me in." And the mother says, "You know where to go," and doesn't open the door. I'm talking about a live situation that I was part of.
Mhm.
Now, the daughter did go and find the Salvation Army and find recovery, but the mother took the risk that the daughter would go away and die.
Mhm.
And in fact, I had another mother relate this. She was in Al-Anon. She took the recommendations. She did the steps. She did all the work with therapy, etc. And her daughter called, and this was like the 200th time the daughter had called, a 30-year-old daughter. And she said, "Mom, I'm really going to commit suicide." And she said, "Martha, I love you very much and I will miss you." And she hung up. How's that?
Mm.
That startled me, I'll tell you that. Yeah. She didn't commit suicide, by the way. She was manipulating. But but we never know.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
That's the, and I just was trying to connect what I heard today with how you get through something like this.
Yeah. I'm sure each person gets through it in a little bit different way. Yep. I'm very confident. And I know people who have said, "Well, those are my children and I am going to take care of them." And in the cases where they're talking to me, it did work out for them where they, quote, enabled them for a while till they got some traction. And then they did get some traction. But of course, I'm hearing the success story, not the failure story.
Yeah. No, this is a failure story.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. There's no formula here. There's no formula, but there's lots of experience in Al-Anon. And
He does that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm not sure it's helpful because it's not definite. It's not a formula. And there isn't one. Yeah.
Thank you.
There are principles. Yeah, there are principles.
Really great today. And I just wanted to bring up that you and I were talking recently and you asked me how I was. And I said, "Oh, I'm really good." But I always notice that my mind goes somewhere negative. It'll ferret out one little thing that, like, something with my kids usually that I wish I'd done or that they weren't doing properly.
The regret thing again. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said, well, you can change that. You could watch your mind going there, and you can change the fact that I'm focusing on the one little thing that's not going as I would like it to go in my life right now. And that I started practicing that in the last few weeks, noticing that my mind would go. We had a great weekend over one of my kids' graduation, and there was like one little thing that didn't go right. I was looping on that, and I thought, oh, look how I do that. I can change that. I can choose to focus on the things that went well and all the good. And I've been practicing that. And then it's interesting that that's what Dr. Luskin was talking about today.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. In the forgiveness realm, but as what I learned from you was that it can be in all areas of
yes.
That's really great. So thank you for that.
Yeah. One of my good friends has a motto that he uses. So I talk about it, and it's pay attention. That's what Dr. Luskin was talking about. Pay attention. This is about consciousness. When you are aware of something, you can allow it to be, or you can change it. If you're not aware of it, you can't change it. You're just sucked into the hole of negativity. But if you're aware of it, you can stay there if you enjoy it, or you can make a choice, like somebody was saying earlier. It's like that's radical responsibility.
Yeah. And I like how he said, if we don't change it, like we're comfortable in the old behavior, we're actually practicing and reinforcing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I agree. This was a wonderful combination with Dr. Luskin. He's got a very special gift of communicating very simply and credibly. Of course, he's obviously very skilled and knowledgeable also. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Herb.
All right, team, I think we're going to wrap it with that summary, a daily practice. Oh my goodness. Dr. Luskin and I did not talk in preparation for this. Forgiveness is a daily practice, a commitment to intentional consciousness, a gratitude list for growth in positivity. Create a list and add one thing, only one thing every day. But the rule is that you don't get to add anything that's already on the list. Now that will be easy for the first 30 to 60 days, but then it'll become quite challenging. You'll have to be very creative. What am I grateful for today that isn't already on the list? And the whole point of that, of course, is to expand your consciousness positively. And then, of course, prayer, step 11, meditation reduces defects, increases virtues, and gives us that consciousness that we're looking for guidance, for guidance and power. Listen to step 11, praying only for the knowledge of God's will, guidance, and the power to do it, because we know based on our acquaintance with unmanageability, more often than not, we know better, but we don't do better. So I not only need to know better because I know that I don't know. I have a blind spot. I mean, today I have that strange mental blank spot, not with regard to obsession, but with regard to reality. And I need guidance, and therefore I'm committed to a daily practice in the morning of knowing better. And then hopefully the power during the day to do better. Do a radar sweep at night in the step 11 meditation inventory, just to see if there's something I can course correct. Step 10, during the day, disturbed. Step 11 at night, all about course correction. He talked about so gentle in terms of the practice part of that. And then, of course, step 12, helpful actions. I've dropped the word service. It's too sophisticated. Being helpful, kindness, both consciousness and compassion, the two primary principles of Buddhism, consciousness, wisdom, action, kindness, compassion. But You know, if you've had any exposure to me at all, that I believe sponsorship in some form, accountability is the most important. For all of the commitments that you make, tell somebody about it and report in once a week, once a month, whatever you decide with that person. My sense is accountability is the single most important moving part of all of the program. All of the parts are important, but if you do accountability, you will do all of the program. A forgiving person has no past. We're released. An unforgiving person has no future. We're not released. Please join me in the serenity prayer, that prayer of alignment with reality. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that cannot change, courage to change the things I can't, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, thank you for hanging in there. We had a really good group, and of course, you're the mad dogs. You stayed right till the end.